Planning Commission podcast is a spirited discussion with myself and a couple of my longtime colleagues in the profession. Our discussions are based solely on our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions or views of our employers, the American Planning Association, or even our alma maters. So grab a seat in the back of City Hall, dig out an old copy of Robert's Rules, and for goodness sakes, read your packet. The Planning Commission is now in session.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 2 of the Planning Commission podcast, season 2, Save the World, Plant a Tree. Man, this is a subject that I know for me, I'm going to nerd out on because I get excited about this tool, I'm going to call it, and we'll get into this discussion a bit more with a subject matter expert that knows the world of urban tree canopy far, far better than us. And man, I'm just truly excited because I think it's something that we just don't talk enough about in the planning profession. So, fellow commissioners, how are we doing?
We're surviving and thriving, standing tall like
2023 off to a
today.
good start, right? I hope it's a good start.
Listen, every day I wish I was Generation X again. I just would have better excuses for my lack of technical skills with this entire podcast situation.
Yeah, but I've got like hips hurting and other stuff when I get up in the morning. So I don't know if you want to go back that far with
we
that.
were left. Yeah, we were left to our own accord. Here's your house key at the age of 6, and don't burn the house down. Yeah, how's that supposed to happen, right? I mean,
I don't know. I definitely tried that. I mean, is that the difference between me and you guys? I actually burnt a hole in the carpet. And
this is true. You did.
Shut the door and hope nobody looked at it.
Well,
my stepdad was an artist, and we had in our garage hundreds of cans of all kinds of spray materials that were very toxic and even more flammable. How do I know that? Yeah. So how we didn't burn the house down, I have no idea. Yeah. All right. Well, as I mentioned, we're going to talk all about a particular feature of our urban and rural environments, for that matter. And it's something that I really, again, it just doesn't get talked about enough in the world of planning. And I think we're going to do our part today to shed a little bit of light on this subject. And that's, again, urban tree forestry and canopy and really the effects, the multiple effects that could have on our health, our communities, and so on. So to my fellow commissioners, first things, question. I just got to ask you, man, do you have any recollection in your life? And I know it's a big ask in a short question or short period of time, but of a particular place or even a particular tree in your life that sticks out as a memory of just kind of going, holy cow, that stuck in my mind. And as you're thinking about it, I'll give you mine. Okay. Lots of them. I thought about this quite a bit. And there's lots of examples that I could go to. My favorite place in the world is McCall, Idaho. Someday when I have to go, I want my remains to be spread around a hill that's filled with all kinds of ponderosa pines because it's just my favorite place. But as a kid, my grandmother lived in suburban Orange County, Los Angeles area, and they planted the absolute wrong species of tree along her street. And they were huge, huge, huge oak trees. And the acorns, when they would fall down on tops of parked cars, sounded like rain. And the acorn fights that we would have, I mean, how nobody lost an eye, I have no clue. But nevertheless, those memories and that huge tree canopy as a kid who was only, 3 feet high was just unbelievable. And sadly, most of those trees have been cut down because, as you would imagine, the root structures just did what it did. But man, they were glorious. And the memories that they still give me to this day are there, obviously, as if it was yesterday. So that's mine. Either of you have a memory of a particular big canopy tree area, or one in particular you used to climb all the time, or what? You tell me.
I grew up in what John calls eastern western North Carolina, which is not a real place. It's just in the foothills, and we had a lot of different tree varieties, which I didn't know was weird until I moved to Alaska. And when I moved to Alaska, I got 2 trees. They got like a black fir, and they've got a birch tree. I mean, that is it. But in growing up, we had I'm thinking of 3 trees that were just like in the yard. We had
Yeah.
a sweet gum tree. We had those spiky balls that like I don't even know what those
Those
things
hurt.
are.
Yeah, those hurt.
They hurt if you step on them the wrong way, but they make really good fun for like playing house. And then it could be anything you want. And then we had is it a poplar tree? And they make those little spinners, right? They're little
Oh,
seeds,
yeah.
and they look like a helicopter coming down. That was a really, really big tree in the yard. And I remember the day
Beautiful.
they had to cut it down because it was like
Oh.
kind of, yeah, it's gonna fall in the house or something. I don't know. I maintain that my mother's just trying to expand her rose garden, and it was in the way, and it was shading her roses. So, and then we had, get this, we had both a crabapple tree and there was a persimmon tree, which is the grossest fruit you've ever eaten.
Oh,
If you
no,
get it
no,
off-
no, no,
If you
no.
wait, if you get it off a tree in some residential area,
Well,
where
when it's not ripe,
no,
when it's
I
not
just-
ripe, that's like
I-
sucks all the moisture out of your mouth.
Oh,
But have
it's
you had
so
have you ever had
gross.
persimmon pudding?
You're gross. I'm no. I'm
Persimmon
not-
pudding?
Listen,
That's classic.
don't eat.
Wait.
Listen, don't eat crab apples either. They are
Oh,
not
yeah, no,
cranberries.
no,
They are
no.
not cranberries.
Gosh,
They look a
no,
lot
I
like
wouldn't do
yeah.
that.
So we
Who
had a
would
lot
have
of
thought
weird
that
trees.
persimmons would be a triggering event for the two of you? Jeez.
That's like the
God.
state
Alright.
dessert of Indiana or something like that. Persimmon
Well,
pudding.
who
I
goes
think.
to Indiana? Let's be honest. I mean, that's
Wow,
a forever.
there's just somebody else getting thrown under the bus. Don, change the page.
I know one excellent person in Indiana, so there's that. That's fine.
I just I don't know if a particular one, but it does remind me of one of my favorite songs by the prog rock band Rush called "The Trees," about the social and work labor struggles of trees fighting in the forest for attention. So that's what
You
I'm
are a
going
Rush
with.
fan. You
And
are a
now
Rush
I'm
fan.
happy to be a millennial because I don't have to be a Rush fan. Jeez.
Wow. Well,
I
So
knocked
Rush
that
is a-
out on Rock Band every time, like a decade or so ago when Rock Band was popular.
Yeah, right.
All right,
Decade?
well-
I think we're thinking 20 years. Anyway, okay. This is
Good
about to get real
memories.
heated.
yeah, lots of good memories, and hopefully our guests will share some of the benefits of maybe said crab apple tree or persimmon, so forth. So
Oh, wait, crepe myrtles. I can't wait to.
yes,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Crepe myrtles. Those are everywhere.
All right. So I am going to get into our whiskey pairing, and hopefully, at least for those of you on the YouTube channel, can see what I have on my screen. Confirm with that, my fellow commissioners. Yeah,
Yeah.
great. So our whiskey pairing, most of the time, Commissioner Kostelik heads this up, but today it's my turn. We're going with Noble Oak. And I have it in my bar, and I had the good fortune of forgetting the bottle today, so I can't show it in person. But it is a really good. They make a good bourbon, they make a good whiskey or a good rye, and man, it's worth checking out. But a couple of things that I had no idea about with Noble Oak, and by the way, they're finished in sherry oak casks, and so that's part of what gives them their extra flavor. But clearly beyond the name, which is obvious, look at this. Every bottle plants a tree. Are you kidding?
Aw.
So you buy a bottle of Noble Oak and you are planting in literally hundreds of thousands of trees all around the globe. And so what a pleasant surprise. Good for the good folks at Noble Oak. Super proud of that. I think that's a heck of a mission. Noble indeed. And I didn't even know a little bit their background. Also, who owns them? Yeah, this company called Edrington. So they're actually a Scotch, a company owned by a massive Scotch owner. Whiskey or bourbon made by a Scotch. Say it ain't so. Well, it's true. They are the makers of Macallan, which, I mean, come on. If you're gonna have some Scotch,
You're going to do it.
Highland Park, I mean, that's about as good as it gets, right?
I think we should start one called Clear Zone Whiskey, and then we can partner with them and plant trees in the clear zones next to roads to make them
I
safer. There's
agree.
kind of the natural synergy.
That's a good call. All right, so Noble Oak, our whiskey,
Good
du
choice.
jour. Yeah, and man, what a pleasant surprise, right? So on to our guest. Oh gosh, I'm super excited about our guest, Mr. Geoffrey Donovan, who is a research forester for the USDA Forest Service. Mr. Donovan, thank you for joining the Planning Commission podcast.
Not at all. It's a pleasure. And I should say, just last year, I planted a persimmon tree outside my house for my
Ah,
wife.
see,
So,
How is it?
Of
Hey,
course we
well,
did.
unfortunately, they only had these tiny little seedlings. So,
It's disgusting, isn't it?
well,
It's bad.
it's the size of a lollipop stick at the moment. So it's
Oh God.
neither
you're
disgusting.
not making pudding yet. There's no pudding cups.
No, you could definitely you can stand over the top of it. But
There's one thing worse than persimmon pudding is like
Oh my
lemon
gosh.
curd. It just
lemon curd is delightful.
So what is
I
wrong
agree.
with y'all?
Have you tried lemon curd and s'mores on the graham
Okay.
cracker with the
Nice.
chocolate? Anyway, yeah,
I
yeah,
quit.
give it a whirl.
This is where I
I
draw the
will.
line with y'all folks.
That sounds wonderful.
Well, I tend to agree. Maybe, I don't know. Like if you mentioned, she's, millennial. We got to cut her loose at some point, but
I don't
we
like
keep her
chocolate
around.
either. I don't like
Let's see,
chocolate
she's
or puppies.
weird. So Jeff, tell us a little bit as we get started, a little bit about you, your background, and your research is incredible, as we'll dive into in a little bit. But how did you take this journey to where you are today, become a researcher? Give us the whole background.
Yeah, so I have a PhD in forest economics from Colorado State. So I graduated in 2001, and for a long time, the first sort of almost 10 years of my career, I concentrated on wildfire, a lot of the economic aspects of wildfire. But sort of around 2000, probably 2008, 9, my boss at the time, he said, oh, urban forestry is kind of the coming thing. You should have a look at that. And so I did a study about trees, the effect of urban trees on house price. It's fairly standard study, but it really got me thinking. And because I'm interested in the intersection between people and natural environment, particularly the benefits you get. So it's the Venn diagram, where the natural environment and the people, so you end up with a paradoxical thing, is if you care about the benefits of the natural environment, you study it in a city, because that's where the people are. So I started to look at various benefits, which we can talk about, of trees. Some of the ones you might expect are fairly intuitive. So they increase house price, they reduce summertime cooling costs, they affect stormwater. But then I started to realize that maybe I was missing something. And so I started to focus on health. I also did some work on crime, but you realize that the public health impacts of trees are really, that's where it's at. That's where the big benefits are. They really dwarf all the others. A lot of the other benefits end up being rounding error compared to the impacts of trees on public health. So most of the last 10 years or so, my first study, health studies back in 2011, trees and birth outcomes. And since then, that's been my primary focus up until, recently. I just published a paper a couple of months ago, which I think you guys saw. You asked me to come on, and that was the impact of trees on human mortality here in Portland. So yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating. It's kind of literally life and death stuff. So I mean, once you get into it, you realize, well, it's so obviously important and so obviously understudied that I'm really delighted that I can work in this area.
And where we bring this in our planning work, and Chris and I haven't done health analysis, when we go back to like zoning code language, shall be for health, safety, and general welfare, yet we come across so many times where the clearing of trees on a lot or other things occur. What are those many types of health impacts that make all the other impacts rounding errors?
Well, let's see. I mean, for example, the study just did, you showed that people literally live longer. If you plant trees, you see lower human mortality. So unless you're a sociopath, that's a good thing. My apologies to the sociopaths who don't care about human life. But if you do, then that's the thing. If had the impact of trees on birth outcomes, that's a big deal. Kids that are born underweight or premature at birth, puts you a much bigger risk of dying at birth or having health complications. But it also puts you on a trajectory through life. Kids who are underweight, premature, they do worse in school, they have lower lifetime earnings. It's a problem. So that if you can really set that kid on that trajectory, at the beginning in a better way, that's something really important. trees also, and also the microbes that live on trees, bacteria, stuff, they can have a really big impact on our immune health as well. That is, they can help train our immune system. They make us less likely to have immune diseases. There's a real sort of increase in immune diseases in Western countries, developed countries, as we, kind of, as we separate ourselves from the natural environment. There are some real profound consequences for that. We're separating ourselves from those microbes that we evolved with for millennia, and our immune systems start to go wonky. We get hay fever more often. Oh, well, that's not such a big deal. But things like childhood leukemia are on the rise, and very serious diseases. So that matters. There's also trees on cardiovascular disease. I think I looked a little while ago. If you look at the 10 biggest killers in the world, the natural environment has been at least associated with positive impacts on 9 of the 10. I think it was like diarrhea was the only one. And in the US,
Persimmons, man.
Persimmons, they could do it. Yeah. They would actually, that could be a problem. But if you looked at the 10 in the US, 10 leading causes of death, exposure to the natural environment has been shown to improve all 10. So, I mean, these are associations. A lot of this work is preliminary, but yeah, it's a big deal, and trees are a big part of that. And the other thing to think about is that the natural environment trees are a modifiable part of the environment. That's super important. It's something you can actually do something about, and you can do it cost effectively. If you find, well, for example, I've done some work on asthma, and we know with asthma, if you go to daycare, you're less likely to get asthma. If you have more older siblings, you're less likely to get asthma, because they expose you to, microbes. You may be familiar with the hygiene hypothesis, this notion that we have to do that. And that's interesting, but you can't issue kids with another sibling or demand that they go to get daycare just to do that. It's an interesting relationship, but it's not that relevant from a policy perspective. On the other hand, if you find that kids are exposed to more diverse trees and plants, that's very much something that can be done. So that's another thing. You can do it cheaply, and you can do it at all. So I think that's another thing that people sometimes forget about, trees.
So in this study that you were just talking about, was there anything that surprised you about your findings?
Yeah, I mean, it still surprises me. Sometimes the strength of the, and the magnitude of those relationships are really, when they pop out at you. I do this, but still you can be like, wow, there's really something here. So yeah, that was a big deal, and that was also interesting. So thanks to Friends of Trees as well on this one, because for some peculiar reason they keep meticulous tree planting records. They don't. You go to other organizations, you go to city agencies and say, hey, I need records of where you've planted trees. Or, well, we don't have them, or they go back 5 years. Friends of Trees, on the other hand, 30 years of meticulous records.
Jeff, before you go any further, can you just explain to people who aren't familiar with Friends of Trees
sure.
who they are?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Friends of Trees are a nonprofit here in Oregon. Most initially started in Portland. They've been around since about 89, I believe. And their focus is kind of what you would expect, planting trees in urban areas. So that's their focus. And I've partnered with them for a while. But one of the things, if you're interested in looking at how trees affect human health, and you look at tree planting, one of the really annoying things about trees is they're slow to grow, right? It's just really, yeah, it's tedious. I take it as a personal affront. And so if you're going to look at it, you need decades of data, right? And just nobody has it. But for some reason, Friends of Trees, they're just good record keepers. So I happened to talk to one of them. This, we've got 30 years of data where we can tell you the address we planted a tree, the date we planted a tree, the species. And I was like, you've got to be kidding, right? And so they were also gracious enough to give it to me. So then I combined that with health data from the Oregon Health Authority. And so we looked at, to look at mortality in census tracts, which there's about 140 in Portland. They're roughly, say, the size of a named neighborhood. So if you think of it as a neighborhood, you'd be about right. Because, for privacy reasons, you can't get data down to the individual. So we looked at neighborhoods, and we found if you planted more trees in the last 15 years, there was lower non-accidental and cardiovascular mortality. So that was kind of interesting. And then, but when you get a result like that, you want to kick it a bit, poke it and prod it, partly to see if it's wrong, right? And then, so a couple of things we showed then is, I mean, you'd expect as trees grow, they would have a bigger impact, right? You wouldn't expect a little sapling to be as important as a 20-year-old tree, for example, or a 100-year-old tree. And so what we found is actually 1 to 5 years after planting, there was barely any impacts of trees on health. 6 to 10, those health benefits start to come out. 11 to 15 years, you see even bigger impact. So that's, when you see something like that, as you're saying, say, okay, that is behaving as it should. And then what we did is, well, let's look at trees and accidental death. Why do that? Because there's no possible way that planting trees is going to reduce accidental death, right? It's just, it doesn't make any sense, but it's what we call a negative control. You look, because if we'd found a relationship, that would be a big problem. Because you know something else is going on, because you look at a relationship between two things that have no plausible causal mechanisms. So we looked and we didn't. So that's cool. So you found an impact on two causes of death that it could plausibly impact, and you didn't find a relationship where it couldn't. And you also found a dose response relationship. As trees got bigger and got older, we saw a bigger impact on health, and it was pretty profound. So I think it was about 11.7 trees per year. That was the average, 11.7 trees per year in a neighborhood. And what we found is that that's associated, and to be clear, these are associations, right? Just so that was associated with about 15 fewer deaths a year, which is not nothing. And one of the things you can do is also to monetize that. So the EPA, one of the things they do, they have to put a value on human life. And I won't go into how they do it, but it's actually pretty defensible what they do. And they say human life's worth about $10.7 million. So if you add that to our, if you put that to our data, and then you look at the costs of planting and maintaining trees, we found the benefit cost ratio is about 1,700 to 1, which is, fairly reasonable return on investment. Ask
any investor if they would like that.
And also
unless it's crypto.
Crypto, they'd be like, that's not enough. But the thing there is, as you probably know, in the public policy sphere, when you actually do rigorous work and say, do policies work, what do you often find? They don't. They have you have a smoking cessation program. Does it actually do that? You have you're trying to reduce drink driving, or any number of things. When you actually look, unfortunately, it can be really hard to achieve what you're out to do. And here, Friends of Trees have just been, just flamboyantly effective, I would say, in this way. So that's really cool. And it also shows you, trees are cheap, human life is valuable, and then healthcare is expensive. So like if you look at when I did the birth outcome one, you put a kid in a neonatal intensive care unit, that's thousands and thousands of dollars a day. It's the care of an individual child can easily run into the millions of dollars. Not to mention, it's just a horrifying experience for the parents. This is something you want to avoid at almost all costs. So, if tree planting, and there's now, I did the first study on trees and health, or the natural environment and health at all, in 2011. Since then, there's been at least 30 studies that have found an association between the natural environment and birth weight. So if you can avoid just one, just one birth every few years, adverse birth, you're paying for it multiple times over just in terms of that. So I think, and I'm an economist, right? So I can think in these sort of ruthless terms, and it's fine. I don't have to. And the way they pay for themselves is quite interesting. And I've got all sorts of other examples I can give you. That a simple one is you look at trees and house price, right? And I can tell you more about that. But one of the things is, if trees increase house price, which I did in Portland, they do, or associate with increase in house price, they're going to increase property tax revenues as well, right? Because it's unavoidable. And what we found is that the cost of planting and maintaining street trees in Portland, was about triple the impact on property tax revenues. So they're actually self-financing.
Oh.
Right, you know, it's not just in terms of benefits to other people, but purely if you were, working in the city government and you didn't care about the people who in your city, which, I think there might be few of those on occasion. And the only thing you cared about was your own budget.
Turn. Yeah.
Then trees were actually appeared to be self-financing.
Chris, there might be an agency related to landscaping in
God.
our area that relies on property tax. Never mind. We can,
Yeah. So anyway, then,
I have two follow-up questions.
Yeah,
This is fascinating. And what
Sure.
I know,
what
right? That's
I know.
exactly why I wanted to have this discussion, because it
I
doesn't
don't
get talked about.
I know that Chris gave me a list of questions to ask, but I have my own. So
Sure.
here's what I want to know. If I want to avoid the inevitable stroke that I'm going to have because I eat too many hot dogs,
Yeah.
and I would like to be a, let's say I'd like to be, I'll give you a number since you're a tree economist. I want to be a billionaire in the next 10 years. How many trees do I have to plant and what kind in my front yard? That's what I want to know.
1 persimmon.
Yeah.
1
Just
persimmon.
1%.
That'll do it. No, I mean, it's also important to think that trees, they're not like a normal thing. They're not like a cup of coffee or a pair of pants or something where you get all the benefits. So yeah, you could plant them in your yard, but one of the problems there is you're going to get some benefits from those, but the majority of those benefits are actually going to end up with your neighbors.
Well, I'm a philanthropist. Okay, it's fine.
There you go. Well, but the problem is most people aren't.
Really?
Yeah, I know. So that's another thing with trees where you have these spillover benefits, right? So if you're wanting to improve your health and the neighbor's health, it's important to think of them as community assets, right? So, yeah, and that's an important point. So if you leave the provision of trees to individuals, we know that you'll get too few from a community point of view. You'll get too few in your front yard. Yeah. So, you often see this case in multiple studies where, a homeowner is bearing 100% of the costs and the majority of the benefits goes to the neighbors. We call this positive externalities in economics. And so we really need to think of these things as community assets. Right. And the problem is that they're not funded that way typically. Portland here, for example, doesn't. The cost of planting and maintaining and the legal liability associated with a street tree are 100% on the adjacent property owner, right? I'm not saying that's good or bad. What I'm saying
is the way it is right now.
It is a thing. So I'm not here to say what should happen. That's not my job. But what we will say is that if you have a policy like that, you will end up with too few trees. Yeah, that's just as night follows day.
Yeah, it just makes it easier for somebody to cut it down the moment it's uprooting a sidewalk instead of working together to figure out the ways to save it, do it different. We get that all the time in communities of just root heaves and we got to cut down the tree. No, we can design the sidewalk differently. So it, as long as it's a healthy tree, can continue to thrive and serve those purposes. I remember being in a sidewalk tree management course probably 15 years ago. And there was a case in the city of Milwaukee where they had basically cut the tree roots just around the full buffer of a sidewalk. And they were literally falling down 2 and 3 blocks later. And the lawsuit determined that each of those had a $60,000 value per tree to the property value of the house. So even going back to that, that's kind of that same story.
Yeah. Well, the legal liability is no joke. I mean, if it falls down, just sidewalk. I mean, I've had to pay sidewalk repairs from trees, and that's a big issue. So even leaf removal, that's kind of a hot issue in Portland. Some neighborhoods get it free, some don't. So again, I'm not advocating for anything here. I'm just saying that if you want to have the optimal number of trees from a community point of view, you need to think about how you're going to share the costs.
We just need to have a more comprehensive discussion. We have these policies here that seemingly have a negative effect. So how do we bridge that and recognize we don't have to be as draconian about it from a policy that's probably 100 years old at this point?
Sure.
So to me, like we all three of us, so you don't know necessarily, work in the planning realm in various ways. And especially in the transportation side, and talk about street trees a lot, especially as
Yep.
it relates to walkability and
Mhm.
placemaking and, you know, neighborhood, all the livability concepts and on and on and on. To me, it's just like, this is the dumbest no-brainer thing that I have found in my career. And I had mentioned this at the beginning of the discussion. If you forget the word tree for a minute, forget that. And if I just said, name me a tool that does this, and oh, by the way, costs like that. Name me a better tool than that. And then when you tell people it's a tree, they don't quite, it's like, it's mind-blowing, but it's so fundamental, and it blows my mind that we are not getting this. And at least in some places we're not getting it. So on that line of thinking, who the heck is pushing back on your research and why?
Yeah, who's the Onceler in your life is what I want to know.
I don't get so much of a direct pushback on somebody saying, hey, I've got a technical problem with your research. I don't believe you've made a mistake. Other than the peer review process I go through, which is that. But do people see it and say, hey, I don't believe it? No, I don't tend to get that so much. I think the problem, they can say, well, that's fine. There's an old adage in natural resources, which is, if you can't count it, it doesn't count, right? And so I think the benefits of trees are fairly easy to ignore. So I think what people will say is, oh, that's fine. But just because a benefit isn't counted in the marketplace, or isn't, can't easily be included in a spreadsheet for a city planning or something, then it's easy to ignore. So they don't need to directly challenge my research, but people aren't going, they aren't making an effort to include those values in their planning processes. That's what I see.
So within like a urban environment standpoint, what's the importance of biodiversity, getting the species right? And then talk a little bit about just with climate change and really species migration, or even in some hotter areas, trees that were viable before maybe not being there anymore.
Well, for biodiversity, that's a really important point. And there's two big things here. One, if you just plant monocultures of trees, you're really going to run into problems with invasive species. So remember, like, go to a little town in Wisconsin in the 70s that has mature elms down on both sides of the street. Then they're gone. And now the biggest thing in the whole county is a grain silo. It has a big impact. Now we've just had in Oregon for the first time emerald ash borer. We're going to lose all our untreated ash trees. So it's really important to diversify tree canopy just as a resistance to bugs, and we're only going to get more of them, and that's going to become a bigger deal. Then the stuff I talked about earlier is, if you're around more diverse plants, that can have an impact on our immune function. And so I did a couple of studies in New Zealand. I was there for a while, and we saw that, for example, asthma, we found that if kids lived in a greener neighborhood, they were less likely to get asthma. But if that greenness, that given level of greenness, came from more diverse land cover types, right, then that was even more protective. So, and then we also found, like, we classified every little thing called a mesh block in New Zealand, which is a very small, it's just like a tiny little area. And we classified them as low, medium, or high plant diversity using a whole load of things. And what we found is that if a kid was born or lived in an area with high plant diversity, they were at 35% lower risk of developing childhood leukemia than a kid who grew up in a lower plant. So it is no joke. We know this in other ways, like farmers' kids are well known. They're much less likely to get immune diseases. Kids who live around animals, even like bad animals, like, cockroaches and things. It's even them. I saw a study where they just looked at the number of animals. So if your dog was good, cat was good, but even having cockroaches is bad for other reasons. But so that diversity, so it matters because it's more resilient. But then it also matters because and this is new research, the link between plant diversity and human health is very new. Even it's a kind of subset of the green health research we've been talking about. But we have, you may be familiar with the biodiversity hypothesis and this notion that we have a global loss of biodiversity, and at the same time, we have an increase in immune diseases. And they hypothesize there's a link between the two. And so some of my work has found specific cases to support that. So yeah, biodiversity is enormously important. We don't fully understand how. And then you act to climate change, absolutely. So we know, what should that diversity be? You know, I know that the city of Portland has done some, you know, plantings with like cork oak and things like that to see how they'll do, because they're more drought resistant. You know, particularly street trees, that can be a really unforgiving environment for a tree. You know, there's not a lot of shade. There's a lot of impervious surface around it. The roots are not necessarily in the, you know, the capacity of the roots to grow can be a bit limited. So they can be pretty brutal environments for a tree. So yeah, we need to think about that, planting diverse trees, planting trees that are resistant to disease, and planting trees that will, you know, that will do well in a changing climate.
It's a concern I have, where Chris and I both live in Boise, Idaho, and we're the city of trees. And even though we're in a semi-arid desert, I just think of the massive amounts of impervious surface and summers getting warmer, and just foresee a time where those trees are going to start getting baked, and we're going to have a more serious problem. And I hope we're planning for that type of diversity. Jess?
Also, I was wondering, you were talking a lot about the impacts of health for children, and like how they're less. Are there impacts for those of us who maybe didn't grow up around this fabulous environment that would have given us a little? Is it helpful later in life? Like if I go move to a very tree place, is it going to help my health?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we know that from short-term experiments.
Okay.
If you were to go outside now, sit under a tree, assuming it's not raining, which it is here, but if you were to do
pouring
that,
rain here, but I'll do it anyway.
yeah, well, let's imagine it's a nice day, and we would know, you would see your short-term markers of stress go down immediately.
Oh.
Heart rate would go down, blood pressure would go down, salivary cortisol would go down.
For hanging out under a tree?
Yep.
I just
Even
saw
the
my
persimmon
anxiety
that
problem.
makes you mad will have that.
Oh my God, it's so gross. I just don't want to eat it.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
that's incredible.
you can
This
pet
is
it,
incredible.
you know. Yes, and then let's think of
Tree talk to it.
yeah. I mean, we think of the other things. We know that those trees are going to absorb air pollution. We absolutely know air pollution is linked to a lot of disease in adults. We know that in greener areas, people are more likely to exercise. Certainly, that's important. Interestingly, greenness can have an impact on community connectivity. In greener areas, people show more social connections. I actually did a study recently where I wanted to measure this. It's been a little tricky to measure. So I said, well, trying to think of a proxy for social connectivity. And I used participation in voting. So how participation is in both primary and general elections. And I found that tree planting was associated with increases in voting. And that's a proxy for social connectivity. So, because we know loneliness will kill you.
So if there's a part of town that you don't want to vote, just cut their trees down.
Cut their trees
Oh
down.
my
They'll
gosh.
just
Don't give that policy tool out there,
Oh my
Chris.
God.
That's what I think I heard you say, right?
That's precise. Absolutely.
Okay.
Precisely what I was saying. But
So
yeah.
this idea of it lowering your stress when you get out there. So this is amazing to me, because the question I'm supposed to be asking is, what are the key takeaways that planners should take from your research? And I'm thinking one, and then you can give me the next top 5. But the one is that we're all stressed out because we have these thankless jobs. And so we should go outside and sit under a tree. That's one key takeaway. What else can we do?
Well, I think you got to think about, I mean, a few things to bear in mind here. One, these are general, that trees have an incredible range of benefits, right? So it's important to understand that range. So, you know, house price, energy, stormwater, crime, health. And the important, from a planning point of view specifically, it seems like planning can become a very siloed thing, because it sort of matches the departmental structure of government. You know, okay, well, I'm in crime reduction. Well, I'm in stormwater management, whatever it may be. The problem is that the benefits of trees cross all those departmental boundaries. So that's something to remember. The other is that those benefits, whether you can count them or not, often far exceed the costs. So something, then the final thing would, from a general point of view here, would be those spillover benefits. That is, the benefits, they're very generous. They spill over to neighbors, sometimes to the whole world. So carbon sequestration, for example, the carbon your tree sequesters, you get essentially none of the benefits. It's the entire world that benefits. If you're looking at, say, stormwater, then it's the city that benefits. So in some cases, those benefits are felt almost exclusively by others. So we know that in those situations, you've got to take a collective viewpoint. Now, if we're thinking purely about health, I would really urge planners to think of trees as an essential part of our public health infrastructure, that they really are, and a cost-effective one at that. And I say those words carefully, and I say essential not as hyperbole, but really the type of benefits you get are really difficult to get in other means. So that's why I carefully but specifically use the word essential there.
And I'm going to immediately call our local largest state employer who I have contacts with, who happens to be a hospital and happens to invest significantly in health interventions, and say, you truly want to keep people out of your hospital? I got something that you need to spend more money on,
And some hospitals, there's programs where they have healing gardens in the hospitals.
Well, that gets me to, I'm sure you're familiar with Richard Louv and his writings of like Last Child in the Woods, and the power of healing that comes along with the natural environment and exposure to it. And so, gosh, so stupid.
Well, we work in a lot of small towns and small cities. We talk about walkability, and certainly the older parts of older ones. We worked last year in Livingston, Montana, and here's these buffers that are wide enough to both safely and healthily accommodate a tree, but they're just gone over time. And even just suggesting a program to go back in and help residents put them in those spaces would just make a difference. I mean, literally, in some go block by block and see the visual and aesthetic difference, but not accounting for that specific health and other possible outcomes.
Well, if you get one of those neighborhoods where the houses are basically all built at the same time, and you walk and there's a block that has mature trees, and then for whatever reason you walk onto the next block and it doesn't, I mean, it's a profound feeling. And I think and what you feel, basically my research backs that up. That's what, so you feel that real intuitive sense that you're in a very different environment. And it's absolutely the case.
So Jeff, before we turn our attention to the lightning round and have some fun, I just want to give you an opportunity. What future research are you looking at doing? What is the next endeavor for you?
Well, I'm really focusing on this biodiversity and health and human microbiome. So we've got a study at the moment.
Isn't everybody? I mean,
yeah, it is. It is. It's really, I mean, the microbiome is it's exploded in importance. So what I'm trying to see is, specifically what types of trees and plants, can they influence the human microbiome in a positive way? Because not just simply like all microbes are good. General diversity is better, but we certainly know there are certain microbes that are associated with positive health outcomes, some that are associated with negative ones, and what type of, yards or open space tend to promote that. So I really want to look into that. I'm doing some work on the East Coast with the gypsy moth. You're familiar with that, defoliates. And I'm interested, like, well, okay, if it's done all this defoliation, do you see a public health impact from that defoliation? So I'm putting a study together on that at the moment. So yeah,
awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, for any of our listeners or folks who are watching, I highly encourage you to take a look, and then we can put a couple of the links up to some of your research on our website and also on this episode. But make sure you search out Geoffrey Donovan, USDA Forest Service Research Forester, because I think I truly struggle with. It seems to me like, this profession of planning that we are all involved in, the three of us anyway, there are some very fundamental lessons learned that after doing this for 100+ years in this country and other places, it's like, come on, we have some pretty solid pieces of information by now that we should be able to apply pretty universally, to improve things. And if we're still scratching our heads about a tree, for crying out loud, about, well, yeah, should we, well, we, like Don mentioned, we hear it all the time. Well, there's maintenance. Yeah, there is maintenance, but there's so many benefits that come from it that it dwarfs any of the maintenance concerns that you have,
But the problem there is the maintenance costs are very real. They come out of
Yeah, that's
somebody's
true.
They come out of somebody's budget. Where do
Yeah.
the benefits go? Where do they get
Yeah.
tallied up? Now they are
Yeah.
very real. Somebody not being dead is a big deal, right? but
Right.
it depending on the person. But that increase in life, it doesn't sit neatly in the same spreadsheet as that cost. So, when you think very narrowly, or, just in terms of the things that can be measured in a budgetary sense,
Right.
that's the problem you get, is that the costs are real. The benefits are just as real, but they're not experienced in the same way.
Yeah, fair. That's a fair point. And it's worth ensuring that that part of the discussion before you go into it. Right.
And if we look at them as a piece of the community infrastructure for health, safety, and general welfare, then we can maybe look at it as no different than a stormwater system, a sewer system, a water system, whatever that may be, and recognize those benefits there. That takes maintenance costs as well.
Yeah. Oh, no, to be clear, I wasn't saying that I support your point. Absolutely. It's just simply that it's just understanding why people do it. I think that just having this sort of narrow budgetary mindset, and just somehow, like, what I'm trying to do is give information so that you can bring those benefits into, you can actually now start to balance them against the cost. Okay, well, it is going to cost us, $100 a year to maintain this tree or whatever it is. But we can now point to these benefits. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give people like you guys the information you have to make better informed decisions, because ultimately, like, I'm a publicly funded scientist, right? And how do I make a living? Like, how do I make myself valuable? It's allowing people to make better decisions. And that's it. That's what I'm trying to do. That's the bottom line.
There you go. Well, and we appreciate it for sure. So
thank you.
A couple quick questions on our lightning round, and we'll cut you loose and get back to your research.
Thank you.
As a Portland resident, it's Voodoo Donuts, if I'm not mistaken, right? Is that a weekly stop for you? Monthly? Never been there?
Oh, I'm not a fan of Voodoo Donuts. They're a bit much. I'm very much a fan of donuts. So I like so I like cocoa donuts.
My goodness, cocoa.
I love I love an old fashioned or a plain glaze. I don't want the ones with Pepto-Bismol in and stuff.
The Voodoo Donuts are amazing.
I don't want it's too much. It's the same like I don't like Ben and Jerry's ice cream. I like plain vanilla ice cream. It's just,
I think you're a donut purist.
I am. It's a noble thing, really, I think.
So we just finished the holiday season. Are you a fake tree guy or a real tree guy for your Christmas?
Oh, come on now. Of course I'm a real tree guy.
Okay, good.
That's a vulgar question. I resent it.
So, saddest tree book of all time, is it the Lorax or the Giving Tree?
The Lorax is not that chirpy, is it?
It does not end well.
No, I'm going to go with the Lorax on that.
We gotta rewrite that in a positive spin, don't we? Give the kids something to be happy about and cheerful.
Can you quote the Lorax? Because I can.
No, I can.
Here.
No, I can quote some books like that. Let's see, Curious George and the Puppies. I'm pretty good at.
There you go.
And what's the little one with Francis and bread and jam for Francis?
Bread and jam for Francis.
Yeah, because that's basically, I eat bread and jam all the time, so I can quote that. But
I love bread and jam, as long as it's not persimmon jam. But anyway,
we all have our lines in the sand.
There you go. Next vacation destination for you.
Probably Southern Utah.
Southern Utah, really?
Yeah, my wife and I try and go every year. Try and go canyoneering in Southern Utah. It's just
Moab?
it's Moab sometimes, but we're often the places with a little less people. So we really want to get out, and that's one of the things with Southern Utah. You can get out where you're literally miles from anyone.
Just not in July, right? Not
no, we tend to May is a good time. So
I'm thinking of canyoneering. Are there trees? southern Utah.
Well, there are. You occasionally
It's a
get in a
different
canyon.
landscape.
You get some cottonwoods down in the bottom of the canyons there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's about where cottonwoods grow.
Yeah.
Everywhere other
Yeah.
trees can grow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another one we have in Alaska. Cottonwoods. It's a terrible
Yeah,
thing.
you do. Yeah, you
Those
do.
are the 3 trees we have.
Well, occasionally you
cedar-
get alder. You get an alder where there's
Mhm.
cut over areas. You get the alder coming back. I lived in Southeast Alaska, so that's a
Well,
little different.
that's just Washington.
Yeah.
To be honest,
Pretty much,
that's like
yeah.
a Washington Canadian situation.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
Cedar City is a pretty cool town. Don and I got to do some work down there, and had no idea the Shakespeare presence that existed in relatively smaller southern Utah city, but because of the university, and yeah, it's quite different. The
Yep.
landscape is very different.
Well,
so.
and I think that does have the serious question. I think trees are good for you, but the natural environment more generally. So if you're in the desert, do I think there are no benefits because there aren't many trees? On the contrary,
Yeah.
So we talk about trees almost as a shorthand for the natural environment, particularly because where we are. But I think it is a broader discussion.
Yeah.
So are your vacation pictures just full of different biodiversity, lack of biodiversity? I never see the tree application there. I know we have that with our profession.
Listen, no, Don, you are the only person that goes around taking pictures of push buttons to see how far they are away from where somebody could reach them.
Says the person who took a bathroom of the inside of a portable toilet in, where were you again? Switzerland?
Hey, I recently took a picture of a speed limit sign that said spa zone, which I thought was the perfect reason to go 35 miles an hour. I'm sorry, Jeff. So do you do things like this?
I have to take. I take a lot of pictures of dogs whenever.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Like
perfect.
a little, and you can't see, but right next to me is my sleeping puggle.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I admire
There-
your ability to then let it go when you're in that
I was
environment.
gonna say
I need
some
to
people
practice
are not
that.
obsessed with their
guess so.
work like we
I guess
are.
I have a catalog of curb ramps from around the world. so-
Well, I would not mention that to a mental health professional.
Okay, the tree
Oh,
economist
no
just
doubt.
told us we're special.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He's go
Just
spend
saying.
some time under a tree and clear that head of yours.
I gotta go
All right.
now.
It's
Mr. Geoffrey Donovan, again, research forester with the USDA Forest Service. Man, thank you so much for your time and your fantastic research.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege having this conversation, and I look forward to seeing
And
more
stuff
things.
we will put to use and have and
100%.
that. So
I'm gonna go
absolutely.
plant a persimmon
Yeah.
tree right now.
Thank you.
Right.
I do appreciate the opportunity. It's very kind of you.
Yeah. Well,
for your
thank
time.
you for being us. All right. So listeners, planningcommissionpodcast.com. Go check it out. YouTube, Amazon, Apple, all the other ways. We're out there. Email us. You can do that too. We'd love to hear from our listeners and viewers and maybe some future ideas. We have lots of opportunities coming up, lots of guests. I can't believe some of them still on the horizon. So can't wait to see how the rest of 2023 unfolds. Commissioners, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. With that, we're going to wrap this episode. Thank you for listeners. Thank you again, Jeff, our wonderful guest, and we'll see you soon. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks.
Listener. Hey, listener, that's you. Would you like more content? Well, if you would, check out our YouTube page. Watch us there. Go to our Facebook page. Like us there. We do live episodes about every couple weeks, and all of our episodes are available on both of those platforms, in addition to Apple, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other places where you get your podcasts. Tell us what you think. What about some guests or organizations that you think we should interview? We're game. Let us know. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll try to keep up the good work. Now get back to your packet.